Some of the challenges of a purely defense in depth strategy, if you weren't incorporating things like zero trust, and the reason that falls down in the past, even if you're using defense in depth, remember it's still not if, but when, right? So we have to take that into account. And so when we look at the methodologies, we live in a world that changes every minute. And the cybersecurity world is very, very much on the leading edge of change and evolution and constant improvements on both sides, the defensive side as well as the attacker side. And given all the new tools that AI and other things brings to the table, quantum encryption, et cetera, well, that means we can also use, quantum protection. We can use quantum encryption. We can do other things beyond just the quantum computation allowed to attack us to make it difficult. So that's really what we want to do. And we have to understand that some of the things that worked in the past may not work in the future, right? Some of the tools, some of the methodologies, some of the attacks we've seen successfully against us all recently are because we didn't keep up, or we didn't understand we had to keep up, right? 0-day kind of events, which just means brand new. So these different and new methodologies are continuing to pop up. The layers themselves are designed mostly from the outside in. So what if you have somebody on the inside or a third-party vendor that we gave remote access to a little bit much than they needed?
Well, again, I'll push back on that a little bit, honestly, because if you're talking about defense in depth the way I see it, let's go through an example. Somebody clicks on a phishing link and the malware gets installed on that host, right? So it completely bypasses the firewall. But does segmentation still come into play? Sure it does, because you might be connected to 5 other machines in that subnet, but nothing else. Does endpoint detection and response come into play? Absolutely it does, because there is, you might have, Norton installed on it, Symantec, I should say, installed on your system, and there was a response measure there. So again, like, the order of the layers matters a lot less, and that the traditional castle and moat is really thinking about it from the outside going in, but really oftentimes the attack these days starts from the inside, because you're landing that malware right on a target system after a phishing link is clicked, right?
Yeah, and that's why they're effective. And the other side here too is traditionally it was hard to manage the individual components. Did your firewall line up with your endpoint protection system? And did you still have the antivirus? And oh, by the way, when you installed the new endpoint protection system, it killed the antivirus. Or I've seen cases where they rolled out a brand new endpoint protection system and it collapsed the entire network because it had a traditional antivirus that didn't agree with the endpoint, right? These are real problems, and managing all of that and testing it and implementing it in a safe way. It's difficult, yeah, but it must be done. And as we speak to insider threat, it's real. Less in public safety than in other organizations as far as the effectiveness, but it costs $4.9 million on average, and it's 9.5% higher than the traditional 4.5 for the average data breach. So what we're speaking to is more about everyone. In public safety, it's a smaller number because most of our folks, let's be honest, are there for the right reasons. That doesn't mean we won't see insider threats. And it doesn't mean that the unknowing insider threat isn't there, right? Somebody who didn't intentionally set us up, but did click the link anyway, even though we've trained them many times not to, or the sheriff who wanted to use those 8 characters, right? We really need to be aware that it's beyond that. And if we look here, we're looking at 200 million records. And when we talk about breaches, it's been really bad last year. We saw some tremendous breaches affecting, about 1/3 of the population of the United States. That's a lot of people, right? And we want to make sure that we're looking at and understanding that.
Oh, and there's plenty of cases where, employing that concept of least privilege could have helped with this.
Yeah.
Because, it started with somebody with access. Did they have too much access? That's the question.
Yeah, that's really when we get into it. And to Alex's point too, if it would segment it off to just that one segment, right? If you imagine that is really important as we look into.
Or if we're talking zero trust, make sure they have the role to use the applications they need and nothing else.
Yeah, not just the malicious insiders, but the negligent insiders, those of us who click the link, even though we know we're not supposed to, or maybe had too much coffee this morning. I was hovering over a link one time and I clicked it because I didn't bother to reach over and use my mouse, because it's harder to click a mouse than it is the touchpad of a laptop.
It's funny you mentioned that. So thankfully that incident Sean talked about was a training exercise.
It was real though.
It was a training. It was a training email, thankfully. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I noticed, at least with the web version of Outlook, when you click on the button to report a phishing email, there's a nice little window that pops up saying, from Microsoft, saying thank you for reporting it. Guess where that window's, and then you have to click OK because it grays the whole screen out. Guess where that window's located? Right over the email.
Oh.
So I always have to very carefully click on that button, hovering in an island where it says the OK, surrounded by a malicious
link. Yeah.
And in some cases, that email is a picture, right? That picture has a link in it. So I don't want to click on it. So I've just gotten in the habit of hitting escape because I don't want to click on the window. But yeah, I'm like, okay, bad move, Microsoft.
And then the other side here too is, remember, they want to be us. They want to take our access, especially if you're in the IT world, but also if you're a director or you have access to anything important. They really want to be you. They want to compromise you. And we've seen threats where somebody brought a laptop and plugged it into the core of 911 after it had been infected. We see these things. We really have to understand them. And we have to understand that we're not secure. We can't believe all the hype when somebody says, oh, you passed your assessment 100%. Well, let's look at that assessment. Let's talk about why didn't you find anything, right? Or other times when they actually did the work and they verified it, let's just not stop. Let's keep working on it. Let's keep evolving our security and make sure it gets better, right? So we really want to understand here that when we talk about the assumptions, when we talk about assuming everything's perfect, it's never going to be, right? Because we're humans and we have humans who work with it. And if you use AI, it's going to make mistakes too, because it sees things that aren't there. It looks for things that we've taught it to look for, but in the wrong way, right? So we have to be aware of that. There's pitfalls in all things. And they shouldn't put all their faith in that, right? We should still have an IR plan so that when they get through, not if, but when, because we miss something in the layered approach or the defense in depth stack or even the zero trust methodology. None of it's 100%. And we have to be aware of that. One of the biggest parts of our mission in protecting our customers as a company that does cybersecurity monitoring is being really aware of all the world and how it changes every day and every moment and what our customer needs, to really understand how it's shifting and how we're seeing attacks from nation states, right? And public safety is really a primary target. So really understanding that and using the defense in depth and the layers of security and zero trust as tools to make ourselves better, because 41% of the cyber attacks bypass network security controls. Really? 41%. So does that mean we're not implementing security controls? No, it means we're implementing. It means we missed something, or we misconfigured it, or we didn't understand the full new attack vector that uses that protocol against us in a new way. So we really have to up our game. And we look at the strategies. We look at what really works is approaching it with an understanding that we can deal with this, we can make it better, but we're going to miss something and making that assumption so that when we miss something, it doesn't cost us everything. It's really what we have to do and look at. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about it. Well, unfortunately, in public safety and everywhere else, we do not have unlimited budgets. We cannot just go out and buy everything we ever imagine we might need. And that actually might not help that much anyway, because we want to design it and approach it intelligently, logically, and using it as much as we can. And then taking into the full kill chain, right? What are they going to do? How are they going to do? What does that attack methodology look like? Is really important. And assuming that we just lock the door and nobody gets in, well, if they have a big enough door and locker, they will get it, right? So it's really understanding that approach. And understanding also that once they get in, what tools are we going to give them? What of our tools are they going to have access to? Can they just use one password and gain control of all of our tools? Because then they're going to be living off the land, which just means using the tools that we give them access to. to encrypt our devices or to laterally spread because we're still using Windows 95 plug and play in networks. And we see this when we're doing assessments, et cetera. So we really want to understand it. And then looking in the bigger picture, well, guess what? We live in the world of the Internet of Things. We've connected so many devices for good reasons to our network, some of them for not so good reasons, that we've actually created almost a Swiss cheese. The castle wall is full of holes, right? And so we really want to understand what those holes are, and do they really need to be there? We don't need to punch a hole through the firewall every time, 24/7 access, because a vendor says they need to get into a system once, right? Well, okay, you got into it once, and we're going to close that door. And by the way, we're going to watch how you did what you did and make sure it was secure and encrypted, and really doing all that.
Yeah, that's a good example too. I hear that a lot. Is Paladin will see something, and our SOC will reach out and say, "Hey, did you know you were being brute forced here? It doesn't look like anything's happening yet, but it's concerning. Maybe Iran and Russia are both brute forcing this hole in the wall." And they go back and say, "Oh, a third-party vendor opened that up and they needed access." And we say, "Well, can you close it now?" And they're like, "Well, we'll have to get in touch with them and find out." And yeah, good luck.
But it's your firewall.
It's like, okay,
yeah.
but it's happening. The attack is happening now, and of course they escalated with priority. But in a lot of cases, there are a couple cases, because I've heard this many times actually. There are a couple cases where they never get back to us because the vendor didn't get back to them. So the whole communication chain was too slow.
They leave it open, and so guess what we do is we remind them again and again.